that have been happening down below. So, I mean, you're the best guy to ask about it.
Well, it's such a huge complex issue. I mean, let's think about the lockdowns themselves and how were they orchestrated, and is there any justification for them? And according to the leading sources, like the WHO, the coronavirus, if you've got it and you're asymptomatic, you can't infect people. The coronavirus, if you wear a mask, it can't protect you from it. The coronavirus, if you take a vaccine, the vaccine won't help you with it either. And lockdowns don't save lives. In fact, they just destroy economies, which takes lives in other ways, like suicide, for example. Suicide statistics are not currently available, and that's something that we need to really ask serious questions about. In fact, almost everything that the government is doing in terms of lockdowns is highly questionable.
Well, Vinny, you're talking about common sense, or just, basic good old-fashioned logic. Clearly, I've been following New Zealand's Prime Minister. I'll start that again. It's cool.
Keep going.
You're talking about common sense. You're talking about logic. Clearly, that is something that your prime minister down there in New Zealand, Jacinda, I can't pronounce her last name, but Jacinda seems to not recognize the basic natural law of the humanity, which is to not harm others, free will. And she's talking about, number one, delaying election, forcing quarantine camps, pushing the vaccine agenda and schedule ahead while posing with all these Hollywood elites on red carpets that are now moving to New Zealand. What is her deal?
Well, let's think about Jacinda's deal for a moment. And if you had to really cauterize the wound, I don't know exactly how to express this, but when I look at her, well, I call her Jizzy, Jacinda Ardern, Jizzy for short. When I have Jizzy in my face, it just feels wrong. All right, I just don't like the sensation. It makes me feel icky. It makes me feel used. It makes me feel like I've just been played with and thrown away. That's what I see every day when I walk around and see these billboards with Jizzy in my face. It's just absolutely horrific. And the population loves her to death. They love having Jizzy in their face, and they can't get enough of it. Just more Jizzy, more Jizzy, more Jizzy, and I can't tolerate this kind of huge heaping arc of Jizzy in my face. I can't believe how terrible it makes me feel. I have a gag reflex. I can't help it. I can't help it, man. It just drives me nuts. And the fact that people can't see it, it drives me even crazier,
Yeah, that is a very unique prime minister, to say the least. Now, New Zealand is so rich with culture. The Maori culture has been just seen all over the world. The chants and the traditions they have. Now, what is the Maori culture or community rather? What is their take on this lockdown? Because I know a lot of them do reside in Auckland, the capital of the country. What is kind of their take on this Jacinda lockdown, the quarantine camps? Are they going along with it? Because I know they're a very tough culture.
Well, it's weird, because it's sort of like how they say autism's a spectrum, so that way you don't actually have to give it a definition and then everybody's on it. It's kind of like that when it comes to Māori sovereignty and radical beliefs and things of that nature in this country. So there's what you would call the brown elite, all right, the business brown table, so to speak. And this is as opposed to the Hewlett Wealth Management corporate financing type side of New Zealand called Fay Rich White Investments. So what you've got is you've got essentially a large proportion of people who don't really take any side, who aren't aware of anything that's going on really to a large degree. And then you have a secretive, very wealthy group trying to push things in one direction, and then you have a very open, very, usually not very terribly well-financed group on the other side that are actually trying to advocate for freedom. And so that's what we've got here in New Zealand at the moment. We've got some radicals who have come out and attempting to block entrances into parts of the North Island, north of Auckland, with their own blockades to protect their own communities from COVID-19. There are a lot of people who are kind of almost to the point where they're up in arms. And there's a lot of talk, and there has been for a very, very long time in this country about armed resistance. However, we don't see that really getting traction so much at the moment. But in Māori culture, at least the elders that I've spoken to and have invited me to the Temple of the Four Winds down in Te Kuiti. I'm the only journalist in New Zealand history to actually be invited down there, Māori or not. They said that what they do, they don't do for themselves. They don't do it for their children. They don't even do it for their grandchildren. They fight for freedom because it is for the generations down the track that don't have a say right now, that aren't around to make any choices right now. That's why they fight for freedom. And the New Zealand Public Party, Billy TK, has gotten so much support from many, many Māori around New Zealand, those people who don't want to be slaves, those people who do want to raise their kids free, those who do want to be able to go fishing and dig in their garden and grow crops and have decent businesses that don't just get taken away because Jacinda Ardern decided to lock the place down. There is big resistance in this country right now. It's not armed, not yet, and I hope and I pray that it doesn't become bloody and that people actually follow what Billy TK is suggesting from the Advanced New Zealand Public Party, is that people need to be calm, they need to be factual, and they need to stand on solid ground. That is the only way that we're actually going to win this away.
That's interesting. So, like there's many opposition parties. For England, they had Brexit. For the United States, there's like Libertarian or Green Party or, such. The sovereignty movement. What would you say? Maybe educate our audience or share with us, what is the actual opposition party in New Zealand, if any? Because I can't imagine this Jacinda just having carte blanche with what she wants, delaying elections, just doing whatever she's told to by her, her masters, whoever they may be. Is there an opposition party like you're describing here exactly?
There is but one, and that is the Advanced New Zealand and New Zealand Public Party. They have joined forces, and they're a very, very young party. They've only actually emerged on the scene less than 3 months ago, so they have now got more Facebook following than any other party in the country, including Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party, who have a media monopoly right now while the country's in lockdown, and they're forcing the media to allow them to give their updates and things of that nature at all times. And despite that fact, we had a look into this. The National Party spent $34,000 on Facebook advertising, and they have roughly half the reach of the New Zealand Public Party, who's been around for 78 days or something like that. And every single hit and bit of Facebook reach that we're getting is coming from unique users to a large degree. We have seen so much sharing of the videos and live streams and things of that nature from the New Zealand Public Party, and when you go into the shares, these are all organic shares. These are individuals out there in New Zealand who don't want to see this country go into a decade of darkness, and they are sharing and they are liking, they are subscribing, they are pushing out the word on the street. They're making their own signs and putting them up on the fences. They're starting their own channels and starting to copy these videos and put them out. It's something that we've never actually seen before, and not just in New Zealand, but ever. a movement that has come out so strongly, so quickly, and so honestly and so fact-based that it's essentially a game changer. We could potentially see the changing of the world if New Zealand manages to throw off the yoke of the New World Order. Now, people would ask me, what do you think they're actually going to get in, or how does the political system work here? And in New Zealand, you have to get a minimum of 5% of the vote in order to be able to get your party into Parliament. And at the moment, there are a number of parties in Parliament. There is, of course, Jizzy's Labour Party, whose environment policy and all policies are Agenda 21. There is the opposition. There is the National Party, whose environment policy and all policies are Agenda 21. Joining the government themselves is a coalition between New Zealand First Party, whose policies are Agenda 21 for everything, and the Greens Party, whose policy is Agenda 21 for everything. And back on the opposition side of the house, you have the ACT Party as well, whose policy is Agenda 21 for everything. Now, of course, they don't come out and say it's Agenda 21 for everything, but if you look at the documents and you read between the lines, it is Agenda 21 for everything. And the only party in this country's history who has called out Agenda 21 as not being a good thing and is actually willing to oppose it is the Advanced New Zealand Public Party. The communists have infiltrated our government. We have proof that they have bribed both sides of the House. And the only party that is talking about the communist infiltration and corruption of the New Zealand political system and its interference is Advanced New Zealand Party, right?
Now, Vinny, let me just cut in here, because you're describing something I have noticed throughout a lot of this takeover, such as Australia. When you say communists, to me, the patient zero of this whole thing, the public enemy number one persona non grata is China. I look into Australia and I see that China now owns, just for starters, all the natural water reservoirs. So let me ask you, what is the Chinese influence in New Zealand? Is it a complete takeover? Because I know you're describing communists, but the communists today, there's these big corporate backers behind it. So it's this corporate conglomerate, and every time I look into it, it is, it's Xi Jinping's friends and the Chinese Communist Party, at least, making up the board of it. We see it here in the United States. So is there, and if you can describe, what is the Chinese influence in New Zealand? Do they own your ports like they do here in Seattle?
Well, a better question and a shorter list would be, what does China not control in New Zealand? All right, that's, right. So basically, if it's a strategic asset, if it's a strategic resource, the chances are very, very good at this point that it's owned by the Chinese. Our ports, our water, our communications, and our businesses, our land, our farms, our food production, our tourism industry, almost nothing's been untouched. And we had the reason why the Advanced New Zealand Party and Jamie Lee Ross from it actually split and got set up in the first place is because Jamie Lee Ross came public. He had a conversation with the former leader of the National Party about the possibility of selling for $100,000 a member of Parliament's seat from their party to a Chinese investor. Okay, he came out with that as a recording, and now the media is attempting to demonize him and say that he's taking bribes from the Chinese by exposing the fact that the Chinese are bribing people. It'll work on some people, but it won't work on everybody. But he's also exposed the fact that both sides of the house are in fact infiltrated by this communist Chinese money. And when you look back into history, New Zealand author and journalist Ian Wishart wrote a book that I did a few episodes for the, what's it called? Audiobook for, and in it there is a section called The Secret War for Control, and it elucidates how China has actually done this. So from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they discovered that 85% of downtown Vancouver, and this was a long time ago, was owned by the Communist Chinese. That 100% of Canada's ports had a triad's influence, and that all of these things that were being purchased by the Chinese were being purchased by recently acquired citizenship-bearing Chinese citizens. All right, so that means that these people have been given their passports, they're officially Canadian citizens, and they go in and buy places. Now, what was exposed here is that investigation got shut down at the highest levels. What that means is that at the time that investigation was conducted, and this was a long time ago, the office of the Prime Minister of Canada had already been penetrated. All right? So, this is the actual game plan, nuts and bolts of how they do things. Number one, have you got a criminal or a spy or some ordinary person or whatever that you want to use as an asset? Here's a whole bunch of laundered drug money that we've acquired through the triads. And here is a passport that we've acquired through the Hong Kong consulate or any other place that's willing to sell good knockoff passports that are actually official for people using a little bit of corruption. Then you send this person with all of this laundered drug money down to a place, say, called New Zealand. And their instructions are very, very simple: to purchase a home. Not a bad thing. To purchase a local business. To not change the name of that business, to continue running that business and continue living in that home and raise their children to be very, very hard studiers. And
Vinny, it sounds like you're describing California to the T. I mean,
well, if I may, it comes down to this. This is happening everywhere, right? Yeah. And once they've got their children to study real hard and get them really good grades in high school, then they get into university where they are encouraged by their parents to go even bigger on the studying and to really get the good grades. Then once they've gotten those good grades in university, they will encourage them very, very strongly to get government jobs. So let's say one time you've got some Chinese steel that isn't up to scratch, but you want to use it to, for example, build a new freeway in Auckland. You've got somebody on the inside who can make that okay, who can make the investigations go away. You've got somebody in, for example, the National Party who used to train Chinese spies, and he was in the National Party holding a prominent position for over a decade. He never got interviewed once by New Zealand media. Only Chinese-speaking media would he speak to, right? This is how deep the penetration has essentially gone, and I believe it was a couple of years back, a number of years back, perhaps, where it was reported by, I believe it was TV3 News, that 57% of the homes sold in Auckland were sold to people with Chinese-sounding names. And then the then leader of the Labour Party, Phil Goff, who's also a UN lover, came out and said, no, then only a few percentage of them are actually Chinese, the rest are the New Zealand citizens. And you say that's exactly how the infiltration works. They get their citizenship so that when they buy your businesses, buy your homes, it's logged as being bought by your citizens, when in actual fact they are working for China, and the people who are working for China, who are here, are deathly afraid that China's actually coming close to getting its plan complete, to come to New Zealand, to take it over, and to turn it into the hell that they managed to think that they've escaped from.
Wow, Vinny, this is really heavy stuff, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight on this very, I believe, critical situation happening in the beautiful New Zealand, which I've had the pleasure of visiting, as you know, in Queenstown and such. It's just a majestic country that I hope the world can really get behind and really help in any way, which way we can. So thank you for enlightening us and telling us the truth, because, as you know, it's really hard to find out truth these days with just everything taken over. But we shall overcome, as they say. And you've been just a real bearer of the light over years. You have been just a truth teller for many, many years. And I know people are going to find this and really follow your show. So how can people catch you and your wonderful show and follow you?
Well, they can go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com. That's Vinny with a Y, because it's the most important question in Eastwood. Like, go ahead, make my news. And if you do appreciate the work that I've been doing for well over a decade, I would encourage New Zealanders to start up an automatic payment to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com, whether that be through the KiwiBank, PayPal or Patreon, and all is very much appreciated. And I have to remind myself that I'm an incredibly ungrateful person, and I need to say to Dean, thank you very much for interviewing me, and to all the listeners and everything like that watching, thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being who you are and doing what you do, because there's nobody left to do it but you.
Thank you, Vinny.